it's just what it is. But I can see to it that the grace that the Lord has poured on me is not in vain. That is my hope.
If you have been wondering why the most famous Bible teacher in America has gone so quiet lately, the truth is that things are not looking good for Beth Moore at all, because the empire she spent 30 years building is being dismantled piece by piece in front of her own eyes. And the woman who taught 21 million women how to keep going can no longer keep going herself. The reasons behind all this will leave you stunned. The video that stunned her followers. On the 5th of March, 2026, Beth Moore opened her phone, hit record, and posted a video that nobody saw coming. Within minutes, the message was spreading across every corner of the evangelical internet, and women who had followed her for 2 and 3 decades were sitting in their kitchens trying to process what they had just heard. The most powerful woman in American Bible teaching was winding it all down. She said, Living Proof Live, the touring event ministry that had filled arenas across all 50 states and Canada for nearly 30 years, would be coming to an end. Only 7 events remained on the schedule. The final one was being planned for Nashville in the spring of 2027, right around the time she turns 70 years old. She tried to soften the announcement. She insisted this was not retirement, and she said the decision had been made slowly over a full year of prayer and quiet conversations with her family, her board, and her staff. She explained that by June of 2027, the ministry would be shrunk down to a skeleton crew with minimal office space and minimal staff, so she could spend the last chapter of her life writing and speaking on a much smaller scale. And here is the part that hit her followers the hardest. A few weeks later, in April of 2026, she sat down for an interview with Christianity Today, and the words she chose felt almost like a goodbye letter to the audience she had carried for 30 years. She said she was getting closer and closer to the day she would see Jesus face to face, and she asked what good it would do to drag a big ego into eternity. She said sometimes you leave a place not because you stopped loving the people there, but because you still do. And she said she hoped that when people looked back on her one day, they would say she was a mess. But she loved Jesus, and she wanted everyone else to love him too. Anyone who had been watching her closely over the last few years knew that something much heavier was sitting underneath this decision, because her body had been giving her warnings she could no longer ignore. The body that finally said enough. You know that feeling when something inside you has been wrong for a long time, and you keep pushing it down, keep telling yourself you can manage it, keep showing up to work and to family and to life, and then one day your body just refuses to play along anymore? That is exactly where Beth Moore found herself in the spring of 2024. She was walking back to her house, just walking. A simple thing that most of us never even think about. But somewhere along that mile, her spine gave out in a way she could not push through. She later described limping the rest of the way home like a cave woman, hunched over, every step sending shocks through her body. Imagine the woman who once stood under arena lights, speaking to thousands, now bent and shuffling on a quiet Texas street, praying her legs would carry her to her front door. Then came the night that broke her. On the 23rd of May, 2024, she sat down and wrote a long post to her followers, and the words she chose are the kind that stay with you. She said the pain had ranged from a constant ache to near agony for years. She had been hiding it that whole time, and for the first time in a marriage that had lasted more than 4 decades, she sat across from her husband, Keith, and cried about it. Think about how much a person has to be hurting before they finally let the people closest to them see it. In the middle of June, she walked into the Texas Medical Center in Houston and met with one of the top neurosurgeons in the city. The verdict was not gentle. She needed major spine surgery, and she needed it soon. By early August, she was on an operating table. By the end of that first week of recovery, she was going from bed to chair to walker to cane, slowly teaching her own body how to be a body again. She joked about using a grabber tool to pinch Keith's ears and steal his bagel chips. That is who she is. Even when she is broken, she finds a way to make you laugh. But the surgeon could not fix everything. There was more to do, and they both knew it. So in April of 2025, she went back under the knife for a second major operation. When she finally returned to her followers a few weeks later, she wrote one line that captured everything. She said it had been the weirdest 12 months of her life. Several major surgeries, a body riddled with fresh scars, and the question, she said, haunted her through every single day of it. How much pain was she willing to endure in order to be in less pain? Read that again and let it sit with you, because that one question is not just about her back. It is about everything she has lived through. To understand why this woman has been carrying so much weight for so long, you have to go back to a small town in Arkansas called Arkadelphia. A childhood hidden behind a movie screen. Her father, a retired Army major named Albert Green, ran the local movie theater. From the outside, the Green family looked like any other quiet Southern household. 5 children, church 3 times a week, a respected man in town who walked the aisles of his theater, greeting customers like a small king. But behind that polished image, something terrible was happening to a little girl named Wanda Elizabeth. For decades, Beth Moore hinted at being a survivor of childhood abuse. She talked about it carefully, in pieces, without ever naming the person who did it. Then, in February of 2023, she finally said the words out loud on national radio. The person who hurt her was her own father, the man who was supposed to protect her. She told the interviewer that nothing impacts your life more than your protector being your perpetrator, and that her father was the person on earth she could trust the least. And here is the detail that really lands. She would watch this same man walk up and down the aisles of his theater. She would see him teach his Sunday school class. She would see him usher at church. The confusion of it, she said, was almost more than a child could hold. How do you make sense of a monster who looks like a pillar of the community? Her mother, Aletha, was no rescue either. Beth has written that her mother battled severe depression that came dangerously close to ending her own life more than once. Her mother stayed in the marriage partly because she did not believe she could survive without her husband. That is not a home. That is a war zone with curtains and a casserole on the table. And then there was Beth's grandmother, who lived with the family, a tobacco-chewing woman named Minnie, who kept a spit jar nearby and somehow became one of the few warm presences in the house. Beth has said many times that her church, not her home, was her safe place. She would later put it this way: so many times her home was an unsafe place, and her church was her sanctuary. That single sentence tells you everything about how she got built into the woman she became. She buried all of this for almost 40 years. She got married at 21. She had 2 daughters, Amanda and Melissa. She built a life that, on paper, looked nothing like the one she came from. But the wound was still there, breathing under the surface, waiting for the day she would be strong enough to name it. And when she finally found a voice big enough to carry that pain, she had no idea that the very institutions that gave her that voice would eventually turn around and try to silence her. From an aerobic class to an arena empire. In the early 1980s, she was a young wife in Houston, married to a plumber named Keith Moore who had been raised Catholic and worked alongside his father in the family trade. Beth was teaching a Christian aerobics class at First Baptist Church in Houston. She would lead women through workouts and slip little devotionals in between the stretches. It sounds almost charming until you realize this is where she learned how to hold a room, how to read a crowd, how to make scripture land in the middle of ordinary, sweaty, exhausted life. The pastor of First Baptist back then was a man named John Bisagno, and he had grown that church from fewer than 400 members to over 22,000. He noticed Beth. He pulled her into his office one day and asked her to speak on a Sunday night. She panicked. She told him she could not possibly do that because she was a woman and needed to be under male authority. Bisagno did not argue. He just looked at her, said her name, and something in her shifted. By the mid-1990s, her weekly women's class had ballooned to about 2,000 women. 2,000. In a single church class. Word was spreading fast, but the climb was not smooth. Her very first Bible study manuscript was rejected by the publishing arm of the Southern Baptist Convention. Rejected. Imagine what that does to a woman already carrying the weight of childhood trauma, finally building something of her own and being told no. Then, something happened that changed everything. A video producer at the publisher named Lee Sizemore flew to Houston, sat in her class, watched her teach in person, and went straight back to his bosses and told them they had made a mistake. They reversed the decision. Her first study, A Woman's Heart, came out in 1995, and the dam broke. She founded Living Proof Ministries the year before, in 1994. From there, the numbers stop being numbers and start sounding like something out of a fever dream. By the year 2015, her studies had reached 21 million people in 17 languages. The ministry had run more than 160 events at that point. Her assets grew from about $1 million in 2001 to nearly $15 million by April of 2016. And then there are the moments that just sound impossible. In October of 2008, the ministry held an event in Delaware. The team expected maybe 1,000 women. 4,900 showed up, almost 5 times the projection. Women drove hours, slept in cars, brought their daughters, their mothers, their grandmothers. That is not popularity. That is hunger. She had built something nobody saw coming. A woman with no seminary degree, no famous family, no pastor husband, holding the largest women's ministry in the country in her hands. And she did not know it yet, but a single tweet she would send in 2016 was about to set every bit of it on fire. The tweet that burned her world down. The date was the 9th of October, 2016, the day after the Access Hollywood tape dropped and Donald Trump's recorded comments about women went global. Beth Moore had been politically quiet for most of her career. She did not endorse candidates. She did not pick fights with politicians. But that Sunday morning, something in her snapped. She opened her phone and started typing. And what came out of her was not careful, was not diplomatic, was not the polished evangelical celebrity voice people were used to. She wrote about being one among many women who had been abused, misused, stared down, heckled, and talked to like they liked it. She said they did not like it. She said they were tired of it. And then came the line that lit the match. Wake up, sleepers, to what women have dealt with all along in environments of gross entitlement and power. She later said that what Trump described on that tape did not just sound like locker room talk to her. It sounded like assault. And when she watched the men she had served alongside for 30 years, the leaders of her own denomination, line up to defend him or shrug it off, something inside her shifted permanently. She described the disorientation of it as staggering. The backlash was immediate, and it was brutal. Pastors started calling for her publisher to drop her. Critics labeled her a liberal infiltrator. Churches across the country began boxing up her Bible studies and shipping them back. Some of them, she has said, were burned. Let that sit for a second. Women who had taught her words for years were now burning her books in protest because she had refused to defend a man who bragged about grabbing women. Then, in May of 2018, she did something even braver. She wrote an open letter to her brothers in evangelical leadership. She described how she had spent her entire ministry life shrinking herself for these men. She wore flats instead of heels, so she would not be taller than the shorter pastors. She showed constant deference. She kept her mouth shut about things that broke her heart. And she ended that letter saying Scripture was never the reason for the disregard of women. Sin was the reason. Ungodliness was the reason. That letter was not just a statement. It was a goodbye she had not yet realized she was writing. Then came February of 2019, and a newspaper investigation hit the Houston Chronicle, and the San Antonio Express News had spent months digging. What they found was almost unspeakable. More than 220 Southern Baptist leaders had been convicted of or pleaded guilty to crimes. Over 700 victims across 20 years. In June of that same year, she walked onto a panel stage at the Southern Baptist Convention's annual meeting in Birmingham. The topic was abuse. About 1,300 people were in that room. She sat with leaders like J.D. Greer and Rachel Den-Hollander, and she said something that should have echoed through the entire denomination. She said they had a serious problem because they had a built-in disesteem for women, and it had to change. While the abuse scandal was sitting on the table in front of them, the conversation across the convention kept drifting back to whether a woman should even be allowed to speak from a pulpit. Beth has said, "It felt like landing on Mars." The biggest abuse scandal in the history of her denomination was unfolding in real time, and her people wanted to argue about whether her voice was allowed in the room at all. Then came October of 2019, and the moment everything went public. At a conference held at a church in California, the pastor John MacArthur was asked to play a word association game. The moderator said the words, "Beth Moore." MacArthur looked at the crowd and said 2 words back, "Go home." Beth's response that day was almost stunning in its quietness. She wrote that she had not surrendered to a calling of man when she was 18 years old. She had surrendered to a calling of God, and it had never occurred to her, not for a second, to stop fulfilling it. She did not yell. She did not insult anyone. She just kept walking. But inside, something had finished, and the door she had been standing in front of for years was about to close for good. By the time March of 2021 rolled around, Beth Moore had reached the end of what she could carry inside that denomination, and a reporter named Bob Smietana broke the story in a single interview that changed the religious landscape overnight. She said she could no longer identify with Southern Baptists because her people were in the middle of the biggest abuse scandal in their history, while still arguing about whether a woman could stand at a pulpit. Her publisher of nearly 30 years cut ties in the same week. She and Keith quietly started attending an Anglican church, and the internet attacked her all over again. Then, in February 2023, her memoir revealed everything at once, naming her father, discussing her mother's emotional crisis, and admitting she had once wished God would simply take her life. When you put all of this together, the wind-down announcement she made in 2026 starts to make a different kind of sense. This is not a woman quitting. This is a woman who has lived through more than most people could survive in 3 lifetimes and is now choosing, on her own terms, to walk away with her head still high. What do you think about everything Beth Moore has carried and where she is heading next? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments below.